Good morning, and thank you all for staying with us. We greatly appreciate it. As Tom mentioned, we will be a little bit abbreviated today. We're not going to rush, but we will have a bit of an expedited schedule. We're still going to touch on potable reuse in a decade, aquatic weed control, and then finally a preview of the 2020 legislative session. And once again, thank you for coming, because what's so important here at AIF is the legislative member involvement that we get to have. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first moderator for our first panelist. And that's going to be Representative Chuck Clemens. And Representative, I've been waiting all conference to say this line right here. He was raised on the chicken farm in High Springs. Chuck Clemens is a fourth-generation Floridian, living nearly his entire life in Alachua County. He's a first-generation college student. Congratulations. Earned his associate degree from Florida Gateway College and his bachelor's degree from the University of Florida. And he's gone on to put that to use as he now serves as the Vice President of Advancement and Communications for Santa Fe College, and he also serves as the police chief for that college, so he's got a lot to do as well. So without further ado, welcome our first guest. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and it's so good to see everybody here. Jim Hanley's big smile this morning, and he hadn't had his first cup of coffee. Let me just tell you, that it is a lot easier going to college than it is living on a chicken farm, and that was all the impetus I needed to study with the books. Speaker, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me this morning. We've got some folks that are subject matter experts, and I'm glad that you guys didn't stay out so late that you couldn't take advantage of these speakers this morning. I'm happy to be here. I guess the best story that I can tell you about environmental concerns is I served on the county commission in Alachua County in the 90s, and then I went straight and I worked for a living for another maybe 15 years, and I decided to run for the legislature in 2016. And Speaker Feeney, this is a great story because I'm knocking on doors, and I knocked on about 10,000 doors. And so I go up to this house and I knock on the door, and Speaker Feeney may have had something like this happen to him, but I said, "Hello, I'm Chuck Clemens, I'm running for the state legislature," and the man had a scowl on his face, and he said, "I know who you are." I said, "Well, I'm running for legislature, I appreciate your vote." He said, "I will never vote for you." And, you get all kinds of reactions, and I'm just like, "Well, sir," I said, "can you mind telling me why you would never cast a vote for me?" He said, "Because 20 years ago, you made me hook up to the sewer system." So some people have very long memories, even though it was a no-interest loan, and we didn't make you hook up, that you could stay on your septic tank and not hook up until the house is sold. So, people do things for their own reasons, but there has to be a mind change in the state of Florida. Our environmental situation is not what it was 20 years ago. My family came to Florida in 1823, and estimated 34,000 people lived in the whole state. When I learned to swim, Jim, in Post Springs, there was about 5.5 million people in Florida. And, it's amazing to me that between now and 2030, there will be more people moved to Florida than lived in the whole state when I learned to swim in Post Springs, there in High Springs. So it's good that you all are here. We've got subject matter experts that are here. We're going to learn about reuse, potable reuse in 10 years. I didn't make that up. But the folks that are going to explain some of the concepts and some of the costs and things like that, and come on up, David, I'm going to introduce you first. David Childs from Hopping Greens and Sam's. He's a shareholder, and I think he's got an intro that's better than mine. He's a self-described, what does it say, David? Self-described water policy geek. Give it up for David Childs. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Russ.
Robert Beltran, make your way up if you would, Robert. Thank you. Robert's a professional engineer, general contractor. He also serves executive director of the Swift Mud, president-elect for the Florida Reuse Association, and he's a subject matter expert, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Robert. Give it up for Robert, please. Suzanne, please come up. Yep, she's going to be And to your left, Suzanne Melker, CDM Smith. Suzanne's got 17-year career, senior water project manager. I'm not going to read her whole bio, but she is the director at large for the Florida Water Environment Association. Welcome, Suzanne. And the guy whose family probably was here before mine, Chuck Drake from Tetra Tech. Chuck is a sixth-generation native of Orlando, Orange County, and you read in his bio that he has some public service grandfathers, great-grandfathers, sheriff of Orange County, and he's also a trustee of the Florida section of the Florida Reuse Association. Please welcome Chuck Drake. So, lady and gentlemen, these folks here, they just finished breakfast. They're probably at the highlight of their day because their caffeine intake is at optimal level, and they're here to understand about potable reuse, and can we get there in 10 years. David, I want you to start, if you would. Give your overview of maybe where we've come from in a short period of time. There's a clock down here, so if you go too long, it's going to zap you. But share your insights, David, on the topic at hand and why it's important to Florida's future.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the kind introduction, and if this is the best I'm going to feel all day today, it's going to be a pretty long day. I'll start off by talking a little bit about the history of reuse. To know where you're headed, you got to know where you've been. And one thing that I think is important to think about when you're having a conversation about potable reuse is that we have engaged in some form of de facto potable reuse since the beginning of time. And in fact, those of you that may be vacationing in lovely towns such as St. Louis or Memphis, or maybe visiting the antebellum homes down in Natchez, Mississippi, or going to New Orleans, you're engaged in some potable reuse because there's been discharges into rivers and streams that are upstream of intakes for potable water supplies throughout this country, throughout this world, and that's kind of the way that it's been for years. So it's not as if this is actually a new concept that we're going to be talking about this morning. One thing that Florida's gotten really good at over the past 30 to 40 years is what I'd call intentional reuse. That is using the treated wastewater and using it to recharge wetlands, to irrigate golf courses, cooling and process water purposes at electric power plants. We're a leader in the nation, and we're there because all of us around the room have made investments in it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is that we have, as a state, made investments in reuse, and part of the reason that we've done it is, in some ways, it's been necessary. We have limited groundwater supplies here in this state, and it's better to use what is typically considered a lower quality water source than what you get out of the ground, and so it's an offset. Better to use that water for those irrigation purposes than fresh groundwater. Then we can use it to recharge the aquifer. We've been doing that for years. Combat saltwater intrusion, some important projects going on to that extent. Rehydrate wetlands, fertilizer demands, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons why it is that we do reuse, and I mean, we've gotten really good at it. I mean, that figure that's on the screen there, that makes us the tops in the nation. Still, as we look forward to potable reuse, you look at what our main reuse component is, and it's still irrigation. And I don't frankly see that number changing anytime too terribly soon. I think when we talk about potable reuse, we're talking about another tool in the toolbox for public water supply utilities. But still, irrigation makes a lot of sense as far as the use of reclaimed water, and will continue to. Some recent drivers, there's this little numeric nutrient criteria issue that some of you may be familiar with, as we add nutrient water quality standards, and that has driven folks out of discharges of surface waters into more reuse, and I think that's going to continue to be a driver as we continue to focus on what we need to do to avoid the algae blooms in this state, that's going to continue to be something, a tool in the toolbox to address that is going to be to reuse more reclaimed water. We have a number of nutrient TMDLs in this state, so that's the total maximum daily loads. That's essentially the restoration program for surface waters. And I think that's going to continue to drive reuse. And it's one thing that's, I think, worth mentioning, because I think sometimes this is lost on folks. Just because you're not discharging in the water, if you're reusing reclaimed water for irrigation purposes or for aquifer recharge or some other use, you still got to make that demonstration that you're not impacting surface waters. And I think that sometimes there's concerns about, well, are we just moving the nutrients around? Well, you still got to make that demonstration anytime you're doing a reuse project that you're not having an impact on surface waters. Another driver, of course, the obvious one, which is the limits on traditional water supplies. And, you just look at the parts of the state, the significant vast reaches that are subject to water use caution areas, that's going to continue to drive. So what are our challenges moving forward with reclaimed water? I think that if you look at this very diverse state, we have diverse communities, we have diverse geology, we have various factors that are going to influence where, what makes sense for a particular community. Some communities will be looking at potable reuse and some won't. Some have decided they want to use lots of reclaimed water for golf courses, others for industrial uses. It's all about where the opportunities are and where that price point hits to where some reuse project makes sense. And that's going to continue to, as we talk about potable reuse, I just think it's important to think that it's not some kind of kill shot. It's not the one thing that everybody's going to be moving to do. I think you're going to have to look and see for your community whether that actually makes sense for you. Another thing that's a real challenge for reuse, and I think some folks think, because they pay for it in their monthly utility bills, that reclaimed water that is some sort of big money maker for utilities. It's just not the case. There are some utilities break even, some very mature systems, but for the most part, it's not as if this is going to be some revenue stream for local governments. It's just the math just doesn't add up. So that's something else that we have to keep in mind. And we're all going to pay for this. And the main people who are going to pay for it, a potable reuse project or any reuse project, is going to be your local rate base. And of course, as we look at as any sort of irrigation or other use where we're putting it back into the ground, we just need to always be mindful of the nutrient loads and how it is we're managing this resource. I think that one of the reasons that we're successful, however, is that we do have a nice state policy framework because of leaders such as Chair Clemens that make sure that we have that reuse is part of our water supply, part of our planning process, part of a real focus from a funding standpoint to make sure that it's duly considered and part of the solution there. So I'm kind of, I guess my talk, Mr. Chairman, is kind of the foundation then for people to talk about fun stuff. So I was just kind of, this was a look in the rearview mirror. Now we're going to be looking out the front windshield and see what's coming ahead. So with that, I'll close.
Thank you, David. Any other members of the panel want to bolster some of the statements that David said or provide a different point of view?
If you want to.
Yeah. Robert, Suzanne, Chuck, anybody have comments on some of the things that David shared with us?
No, I think, I've learned a long time ago never to argue with an attorney, but other than that, I always find the reuse question to be an interesting one because it really is about the future of what we're doing and how we're going to do it and the new perspective we have to have of what this water is. And David hit some great points as to some of the legislative processes that need to come into play, some of the policies that are in place, and then the whole mindset of the educational process of the public is a major element of what we're doing going forward.
Suzanne, questions, comments?
No, I'm in complete agreement. I think the biggest issue is that we've sold reclaimed water so well over the years to the public. We've done a great job with that. The public knows it. It's purple pipe. They know what to do with it. They bought off on it. And now we're in that transition stage of, okay, we want to use this water for other purposes. And what is that? How do we sell that and making sure we're doing it appropriately?
Right. Chuck, you want to argue with an attorney?
I've done it before. Florida's got the best environmental laws in the nation. We with Tetra Tech, I travel across the U.S. and see things that we started 45 or 50 years ago with Chapter 373 that some of the western states are grappling with. I was in the conference in Colorado, and they were saying, oh, we should do this and we should do that. And I pulled up 373 on my iPhone and started reading it. Like, where are you guys? That's why Florida's a leader in the nation. And with potable reuse, we're going to continue to be that way. So in 10 years, we're going to have it.
But isn't it in the West where they talk over whiskey and they fight over water, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Robert, share your primary thoughts with the group this morning.
Sure, I appreciate that. And oh, there we go. Perfect. So, as I was saying earlier, I really think this is more of a discussion about water supply and how reuse really works with water supply. And an insufficient, clean, reliable, economical water supply is probably one of the most important issues as a state that we face. And I say that because water supply really is the base of everything we do here as a state. Our water supply supports our agricultural processes, our businesses. It supports the lower cost of living when we have clean, reliable water, which then improves our quality of life and ultimately provides a better atmosphere that we want to all have here in Florida and why people come to our state to live here. The water shortfall crisis that we're seeing in the state in the next 20 years is one of the hardest issues for people really to relate to because they don't see it today. It's not in their faces. 67%, and this slide was up the other day, is in a water use caution area. We don't see these issues until we see them, right? Until we have the blue-green algae, till we see our lakes that are dried up and what's happening, till our wetlands are dried out, until our water quality in our springs have changed because we just don't have sufficient flow to blend in there with them. It really is an issue of water supply and other tools in the toolbox to make that water supply more efficient and better off for our overall economic progress. What's happened is 67% of our state is in a water use caution area, so we're looking more at conservation, which is what we always need to try to do first. But we're also now tapping out our other resources. Surface water is being used near the end of the river systems. We're seeing saltwater conversion to fresh water, which is extremely expensive. And ultimately, in the past, we've used reclaimed water, but more as an irrigation source, which is probably not the most efficient way of using reclaimed water. So we need to talk about changing that mindset a little bit. In the Southwest District, and compliments to my friends at the Southwest Florida Water Management District for giving me some of this information, we have 11 of 16 counties that are in the water use caution area state out there. And so that means those traditional supplies are just not available to us. We see issues within our environment that are occurring every day with the saltwater intrusion line coming in closer and closer, and farmers' wells getting saltier, not being able to be used. During the water wars, we saw the Tampa Bay water lakes drying up. We see the ridge lakes along the eastern side of Polk County, which is our canaries in the coal mines, showing impacts from groundwater withdrawals. And then we're also seeing other issues that occur in the Plant City, Dover area when we have to overutilize our resources to protect our strawberries, right? So when we overpumped our strawberries, what did we see? We saw a number of sinkholes opening up. So providing all the tools in the toolbox, to me, is what this is, and it's more about getting this tool in the right place in the next 10 years. Because what we do know is more and more people are coming to Florida. They're not stopping. They're still coming here. And why are they coming here? Because of the weather we have, because of the water resources we have, and the difference of type of communities we can build that make people attracted to come here. But we have to balance those needs for those people along with our natural resources, because that really is the driver of our economics here in the state. And we really need to be sure that we're protecting that. Now, we've done a lot of great work over the years, and it's been led by the Southwest Florida Water Management District and others. You can see here 52% of the water utilization is being used in the southwest part of the area for reclaimed water. That's 34% for Florida, a leading nation, as Chuck said earlier, when the national average is only around 7%. So we are leading the way, but we got to be more efficient about how we do this, and that's what I see happening over the next 10 years. Traditionally, this has looked like this, right? We have purple pipes everywhere. And when we introduced this topic to the public, we had to have purple pipes, we had to have purple sprinkler heads. Heaven forbid if we had the children playing in the reclaimed water, right? We really need to make this more about the quality of the water we're producing versus the past of where the water comes from. And so we really have used a great system and done what we could at the time, but now we're evolving to the next level, to the next state of mind on this. And so, when we do irrigation, it's great. but it's highly inefficient and it's not a moneymaker. We're talking about a dual distribution system. You're talking about meters. You're talking about customers. You're talking about maintenance. You're talking about a lot of things that utilities have to do day in and day out to make that irrigation water available, which is only about 50% effective on offsetting potable water use. So how do we do things better? Well, we're seeing things happening now, right? We're seeing this education occur in the southwest part of our state, and we're seeing projects like the South Hillsborough Aquifer Recharge, where we're putting water in the ground to help that saltwater intrusion line, to keep that saltwater barrier back and provide that more fresh water for the better use of time. We're seeing projects like TAP in the city of Tampa, where they're looking at bringing that water, instead of discharging 42 million gallons per day into the bay, bringing that in back to the system and making it available supply to either recharge the aquifer or even potentially use at direct potable reuse. Clearwater has done a great project in which they're treating the water to a high level upstream of their wells, and then pulling them back out as drinking water. And so that's a pioneering project. And then we're seeing other members starting to play as we come closer and closer into the state. Plant City's looking at a McIntosh Park where they're looking at mixing stormwater and reclaimed water together, and then re-injecting and providing aquifer recharge to the overall system in an area where our farmers are dependent on that aquifer to protect their agricultural products. And finally, even Polk County is now starting to play in the mix, and they've been looking at recharge and even doing a direct potable reuse pilot study. So you're seeing the evolution of being more efficient with our resource, which is where we need to go when it comes to water quality. At the end, I think, today's technology makes DPR its most clean, reliable, economic supply, and it's not geographically restricted. You don't have to be at the end of the river to get the source of water. You don't have to be on the coast to have your desal plant. You can be almost anywhere where wastewater is generated, and it can be cleaned up and utilized again. So I think in 10 years that has to happen. I also believe that we need to recognize in the next 10 years that reclaimed water is a safe source of supply, and that it's something that's a viable option to what we use when we look at our tools in our toolbox. Legislative policies and rules that are based on science need to be implemented in the next 10 years, and leadership needs to take that on. The Potable Reuse Commission has done some great work to bring that science forward for everybody, and I think now we need to take that to the executive and legislative leadership of the state to implement that science in a safe, reliable way that protects our public and protects the environment moving forward. I think the pilot projects I've talked about will ultimately help the public education understand why this is so important, and it's not the water that's coming out of your toilet. I had a good friend of mine that calls it upcycled water. So we're upcycling our water and making it a useful thing, and we got to quit thinking about its past, but look at its future, because it's too important to what we do as a state.
Robert, spot on, right in the middle of the bullseye. Education would be the key, and I remember the poopy water bill, and you talked about upcycling water. How do you go from reclaimed water is safe, sanitary, using it as an aquifer recharge? And how do you combat those that would put forth information that maybe not exactly is correct, that it's somehow harmful to the public? And how do we fight? How does industry, how do experts and then members of the legislature fight that public perception that it is not safe?
Yeah, my thoughts, and you're seeing a lot of this starting to occur now with the Potable Reuse Commission, is it can't be us carrying the message. It's got to be our doctors. It's got to be our other professionals that understand the risks and that people will trust, right? You never be the conveyor of your own message if you can have other experts that will support you. And I think that's the key, is getting other people like the farmers and the agricultural interest involved in the process, make sure they understand it's safe, and then let them be our advocates moving forward. Especially the medical stuff.
Susan, what would you add about the education process and getting that information out to the members of the public who are unaware of the differences?
Yeah, I think that we need to be consistent in our message and come as a group versus try to individually. I think so far in utilities messaging or trying to go after legislation is over the years it's come bottom up and utility by utility, and then in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, I feel like the groups have gotten together and are a little bit better in coordinating that message, which helps then sell it. But then we also got to realize that each individual area of the state has a different need for the message, and the people that are utilizing the reclaimed water, the potable reuse, have a different perception of it. So we also got to realize that a joint message, kind of like a joint message for come to visit Florida, right? If you want to go to visit Panama City and visit Miami, it's completely different messages, right? So it's the same thing. We got to give the come here, drink the water, but we also then have to realize that it's specific to the individual areas and let the utilities have some ownership of that as well.
I also believe that power of the press comes into play here because during the poopy water bill debacle, I read and others read editorials from major newspapers around the state that had something detrimental to say about the utilization of reclaimed water and maybe sparked some fears. I never saw any other press that would debunk some of the falsehoods that appeared on those editorial pages. And so I would think that I'd like to hear from the experts here, what can be done to put forth facts out into the public? Is it meeting with editorial boards across the state? How do you start to form that public opinion in the most, I guess, factual and effective way?
So when we did the City of Clearwater's indirect potable reuse project, we gave tours to anybody who wanted to come, from realtors associations, schools, whoever wanted to come out, they could see the process. We're doing that at Daytona Beach so that public can see how that water is highly treated. It's spick and span, nice and shiny equipment. Invite the press, get the medical associations out, and let them see what it looks like. Most people, like have no clue where our water comes from, how it's treated. You take them out to a water treatment plant, they have no idea. That coupled with individual one-on-one meetings, we have to do that, and that's the basis of the Daytona project.
Maybe get the mayor to drink a glass of it.
That works.
Senator Simmons did.
There you go, yes.
I will say that the way I've seen it most successful is that when you are constantly inviting the press over. It doesn't have to be a specific purpose. You're just constantly with them. You're inviting them over for the littlest news stories, and you have to develop a relationship with them because they will go to the easiest methodology, and if that is throwing the information that's out there out, but if they know you and have a relationship with you, they will start, okay, is that true? Can you tell me the real story? So it takes time, though. It's not something that we normally do.
And in Clearwater, it almost became background noise. They were constantly updating the webpage, sending information out, so the people just like, oh, yeah, I heard about that, and it was no big deal.
So basically, they put enough factual information up front about the topic that it helped to mold the public perception as it was moving forward.
Yes.
Suzanne, is a decade realistic? We didn't just make this up. Portable reuse
I think you
in
made
a
it up,
decade.
actually. Yeah, it's realistic for sure. And I like this transition because you talked a lot about water resources in the beginning side, and I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on the technologies and the next step, right? So when I think I was here yesterday listening to some of the reuse discussion, and these are the three words that come to me over and over again when we're talking about potable reuse. We have to have the technology that can do it. That is step number one, right? And it's proven. We've proven it in the last probably about 50 years, and it's just gotten better over the years. And we'll give you some examples of that in a second. But the end of the day, to be able to look at the public straight in the eye and say, this is meets the public health requirements, you are safe. You need the technology to support you in that effort. The other thing I would say is partnerships, and we've talked about that a lot so far. I mean, you're talking about partnerships with water management districts and utilities, with universities, with agriculture and growers. You have to have partnerships to make projects like these work, and really that includes the health organizations and the other entities. So it's key. You cannot do this on your own. And the next one is a very serene picture, but really the intent is there needs to be flexibility because every utility is different. The source water is different. The purpose is different. We have to be flexible, not only in the frameworks and the regulations, but also in how we understand the water to be used. So just keep that in mind as we go through. We want to maintain that. I'm going to talk a little bit about South Florida because that's where I'm from. And I would say out of all the areas, we have been doing irrigation water similar to some other areas in Florida, but consistently golf courses and residential, and mainly actually new development residential. So that's why you see so much more reuse of reclaimed water in Palm Beach County than Broward County. The ocean outfall rule is a big deal in Southeast Florida, and that is driving reclaimed water. So in the next 10 years for South Florida, it's really an expansion of reclaimed water. I will say that they're closing golf courses. Who knew? That is less of an option these days. And when you've already done new developments, you're getting down to having to go street by street and neighborhood by neighborhood, and that is not cheap. So the concept of reclaimed water is definitely going to expand in the next 10 years, but it's going to change slightly. I just want to highlight this project because I know it's going to happen, and it's a huge project for Broward County to meet the ocean outfall requirements. It's $100 million that they're spending to get the water to Palm Beach County. They're essentially giving the water to Palm Beach County. But that's another example of a partnership. Palm Beach County had a bunch of golf courses on the south end of their system that could use the water, and Broward County didn't. So that partnership was key because Broward County was in a pickle. The other things that they are using them for is we're looking at recreational ponds, and you're looking at chiller systems. It's not anything new. It's just an expanded repertoire of options. And that's what we're having to do now with reclaimed water, especially with the limitations of golf courses and development. So we talked about conservation, which is always step one. Reclaimed water, which is really the step that we've been doing so well for the last 25 years. But if we want to actually have an alternative water supply, that is not reclaimed water. I think you said 50%. I mean, you need something that's more efficient. And I love this quote, we never know the worth of water till the well is dry, right? We are spoiled, especially in South Florida. We have a Biscayne and the Surficial, and the driver isn't really there right now for it, but in other parts of the state it is. And when you're looking, you need water supply, and you're looking at the most cost competitive option, potable reuse, basically highly treated reclaimed water to pure drinking water standards is a cost competitive option that meets the requirements, and we can do it. We have the treatment technologies to do it. So we've been doing this for a while. I mean, I think this picture is from the 80s. This is a space station, yet, today's coffee, yesterday's coffee. I'm not going to get into the details of what they're doing, but I mean, we've been doing it. It's proven. I want to highlight this project because it's just been operating for so long. This is the Orange County, California groundwater replenishment system. And it's not a direct potable project, but they treat the water to potable drinking water standards that meet both federal and state regulations. It's a 100 MGD facility, and they're expanding it to 130. And the only reason why they haven't done it yet is because they don't have enough wastewater. Apparently, people need to be more active. But they have a limitation. They're using every drop they can because it's such a valuable resource, and it's cost competitive enough that they want to expand it and continue. The technologies that they use, I'm not going to go into them in detail, but those technologies are proven, and they're also the technologies that we're looking at here in Florida. I want to talk a little bit about JEA. This is a project that CDM Smith was a part of, and Paul is not here today, but some of this slide, the top left, I guess, was in his discussion yesterday. But this is one of the pilots that I think is the most interesting because they not only tested two technologies, which is similar to what other utilities are doing, but they also have different source waters. They have an industrial part of Jacksonville that is more of industrial wastewater source water, and then they have the domestic side. And what they did is they bracketed, right? They said, okay, well, we want to be able to treat both. And so we want to test the technologies against both so we can really figure out what's the impact. And that's what a lot of utilities are facing because your source waters are going to be different, which is why the demonstration and the pilots are really helpful for each utility to do because you can't just say, oh, I want to do the same thing that JEA is doing or the same thing that Orlando is doing. They are different, and you need to be tested. They need to be tested to confirm. And these, it's pretty much reclaimed water treated to potable water quality, and pure water came out. I mean, it is drinking water. They're drinking it in that picture. They actually downed it, I saw. But it's cost effective, and it's happening. And really, the next step is underway. They are going ahead, and with that information from that pilot study, which is they picked membranes, they are going to do a 1 MGD demonstration facility that is expandable to 10 MGD immediately. So they're intending that it's successful. They're buying. And when we talk about partnerships, they worked with St. John's a lot, St. John's River Water Management District, on that development of that to make sure that it met all the requirements and it was a team. And now they're working with UNF as an academic partner. And this is something that we're seeing more and more. Gwinnett County, Georgia, basically a municipality is developing a whole innovation center. And Melissa Meeker, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is part of that. It is a game changer. The technologies and the work that we are doing as utilities is something that we underappreciate ourselves, I think, half the time, right? So give yourselves a clap every now and then. So the outreach is key. And I'm gonna, if I have some time, I think I didn't get in too much trouble. I'm gonna do a quick video if it's okay with everybody, because it's an example of setting the stage, right? And every utility is different, but the videos and getting the information out there is really key to get the public acceptance. Do I need to press it? Okay.
Water. It's part of our lives. It is vital to the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. Water is critically important to life itself. But what happens if the water resource we count on just wasn't enough for all of us anymore? That's something we think about every day at JEA. Because although our drinking water supply exceeds our needs today, we must still plan for the future. Coming from the pure waters of the aquifer, our supply of drinking water will face challenges. As our area grows, our water supply is approaching its sustainable limit. Although our residents and businesses do an excellent job of conserving water, conservation alone simply isn't enough to assure our supply for the future. That's why JEA is taking a forward-looking approach to assuring a sustainable water supply for generations to come. One innovative solution is recharging the aquifer with purified, reclaimed water, which exceeds drinking water standards. It's been proven elsewhere, but JEA is undertaking an investigation to see if it's the best approach for all of us here in Northeast Florida. At JEA, we don't take water for granted, which is why we're exploring the technologies that can provide all of us with a safe, abundant water supply for tomorrow and long into the future.
All right, so I'm going to end with, this is my vision of water in 10 years. Everybody's going to have a HoloLens when we're doing potable reuse in 10 years. Really, I think the goal is back to my first slide, which is the technology. The technology is continuing to prove, but really it's proven as it is. It's just going to get better. The partnerships are key, and this group here is a perfect example of the type of partnerships that are required to make this happen. And then just keeping in mind that when we're developing the framework and the regulations, to really be flexible and allow the utilities to demonstrate the successes, science-based, obviously. But, let's understand that we're all a little bit different, and we all have different angles and different beginning sources, and let's keep that in mind as we're developing these.
Thank you, Suzanne. Your talk has inspired me to ask a question about partners, academic partners. And you touched on it a little bit. And so I have twofold question. One is, how can we best devise curriculum for K through 6 or K through 12 to ingrain some of these types of concepts into our younger Floridians so that they grow up with a better baseline knowledge of the importance of water for our peninsula? And then the second part, I'll ask both questions at the same time, the research partners in higher education, and what roles would they have into furthering this reuse, reclaim industry?
Yeah, okay. So I actually have a 7-year-old in second grade, and I can tell you that Most kids have no idea where the water comes from anyway. It just magically appears. So I think we have, we're really starting from ground zero when you're talking about kids. They don't have a perception at this point. It hasn't been created in their mind in elementary school. So we have an opportunity to create that this is the norm. What we're doing here is something that's done in other places. And they, at that age, they're not afraid of what that outcome is because they haven't lived through all the poopy water articles that you've read. So I think that key is getting the message in a very simple way to those students and teachers. And there's a lot of more programs in elementary schools that are environmental focused. And I think we just need to take that opportunity to leverage that program and help it add that water supply to it. There's a lot of environmental water resources stuff. But yeah, as an industry, we really need to do a better job at just getting the material to the teachers. And I don't think it's hard after that because they don't have a basis right now.
What about the,
So universities, the universities in Florida are amazing, and they're all doing great work in this area. The partnerships are really not that hard to develop, and you see them at USF, UNF, FG, Florida Gulf Coast, I always say that wrong, FAU, and so we're doing it now. What they're doing in Gwinnett County at the Innovation Center, too, is the colleges are essentially providing staff, and they're actually populating the area. So the city built it, and then the colleges are the ones working it, let's just say. So there's more of an opportunity to do that, to really have that connection, that cross-connection, versus just, we send you the information and you look at it and send it back. There's more of opportunity on the university side to have it connected, where they can literally be working out of a utility or out at the pilot plant, and it can be more of a back and forth. But I think as of right now, the universities are well integrated into this industry, and we're probably one of the better states in that.
Suzanne, how would you or other members of the panel advise appropriators when it comes to investing for the future of Florida's water supply? Not only the importance, but that there is a cycle involved where you invest, research is done, applications are put out after that, and then the results help us to get to the next level. What would you tell appropriators about the importance of investing in that research?
Yeah, I think the investment at the demonstration stage is key because it's not a huge investment at that stage. And that demonstration commitment from the legislator also then helps guide some of the other ones to be more efficient in how they're doing theirs. So I think that initial support is key. And then at the end of the day, it is going to be a lot of ratepayers. But at the same time, the commitment by the legislator to support these types of projects, funding, yes, but I think the funding is mostly to get them to the demonstration because it just helps people go to the next step.
Very good. We're not playing baseball this morning, but if we were, you understand that the fourth position in the batting order is very important. Just by happenstance this morning, Chuck is the fourth position, and I know he's very skilled. Yeah. So Chuck, will add value to the base that your colleagues have shared with us this morning.
I'll add to what Suzanne said. Joanne Jackson's out there. Make sure I say this correctly. City of Altamont Springs has the science incubator, or is that Seminole County? So Altamont. So the city of Altamont Springs has their science incubator at Lake Lotus, and they take kids through the wastewater plants, the water plants, show them how to take samples, run analyses. And this was a few years ago. They were running 3,000 students through their young kids. So you get them that hands-on training. And what I suggest too for after 8th grade requires some earth sciences. So me being a geology guy, I've learned this years ago, is like after 8th grade, earth sciences falls off the radar. So when you talk about the importance of groundwater and water in Florida, the students don't even know that opportunity is out there. It's gone from their little brain cells. So earth sciences.
Good answer.
Thank you. Okay, so I started working in '82 at St. Johns River Water Management District, so this is like my 4th decade if I added correctly. I did go to the University of Florida, so addition is kind of hard. Every 10 or 15 years, you got that one? Good. every 10 or 15 years, something happens that changes our trajectory. When I came in, reclaimed water was just coming in. Purple pipe was oh my God, it's going to kill people if you drink it. But Water Conserve 2 here in Orange County takes 25 to 30 million gallons per day of indirect potable reuse, I'll call it, up to like 60 or 80 million gallons a day. That was the first big game changer in the early 80s. Then aquifer storage and recovery gained us another big leap, and it got set back with a arsenic limitation. Potable reuse and the improvements in reverse osmosis technology and just overall treatment technology are going to push us into the having potable reuse in a decade. So this is like I tell the young engineers, like you're on the forefront of making that next huge leap. The water we pump out of the ground now is equal to what we did like 15 years ago because of everything we're doing. So this is really what's going to kick us into that next decade. So I'll talk about two projects. Altamont Springs, I'll gloss over. They did an indirect potable reuse project, and Daytona Beach is direct potable. I'll hit Daytona Beach first. This is real similar to the picture that Suzanne showed of the Orange County, California groundwater replenishment system. I took a tour out there a few years ago, and they've got that beautiful RO facility, that big glass building. And when they took us through, they were mentioning that when they have the tours of public come through, public will say, well, but you're taking wastewater and reclaim. Like, oh, no. That's on the other side of this chain link fence. This is the water purification facility. Oh, okay. Completely, even though it's only separated by a chain link fence and the pipes ran from the reclaimed water over to the water purification facility, that chain link fence was the separation in the public's mind. So at Daytona Beach, the wastewater plant in this picture is on the left, where I have the demonstration testing site facility labeled. Over on the left-hand side is the water plant. So Daytona Beach had a perfect setup for the location of water plant and the wastewater plant to easily take that reclaimed water that they send out and treat it to potable standards. So the location was perfect for that. One more view. Same issues that most everybody has. Traditional groundwater supplies are limited. They have Indian Lake MFL that's right next to their Indian Ridge well fields. They've got that. They have discharge limitations on the Halifax River. Difficult to meet they are meeting the TMDLs, with the Halifax as an impaired water body. So looking forward, what can they do to solve these multiple water supply issues and reclaimed water? Well, they got the perfect setup to do that. So they built a completely separate building. It's not a rehabbed or rehashed building, but they built this $3 million facility for using the full advanced treatment. And you probably heard about it yesterday. We're in the second quarter of the 2-year demonstration project. And this is, I'll stress this is a real, honest to gosh, water treatment plant. It's not just something off to the side. This is a real water treatment plant. Same objectives that Suzanne mentioned, mostly is collect that data to give the regulators to show that this process works. We've done a couple of reverse osmosis membrane challenges to see which membranes work the best for that source water. And also use it for the public education, take tours and take people through, which we've done at a couple of conferences. You see the building is nice, not varnished, but highly polished concrete floors, stainless steel equipment, and it's full, like I said, it's a real water treatment plant. This is full size RO membranes, ultrafiltration, and ultraviolet light. So the first round of quarterly data we took, we looked around, we found out the water's clean, really, really clean, like darn close to pure H2O, which you don't want to drink because it'll kill you, in case you didn't know. So you can see in red are what the influent sample was. In the red up there for the amoxicillin, 10,000 milligrams per liter, and there's no little blue bar just to the side of it. That's because it was non-detected. And we're sampling down in the parts per billion range. And you see some of these other constituents. Caffeine, 1.3 nanograms per liter. You have to drink about how many thousand cups of this DPR water in order to equal the caffeine in 1 cup of the caffeine that you're drinking today. And the same thing with the Cipro, another antibiotic, 6.2 nanograms per liter, like virtually non-detectable. So the same, well, I can't even pronounce the TDCPP, but 6.8 nanograms per liter, health risk limit of 20,000. So 7 out of 20,000. So we're not even near what that health risk limit is. Non-detects for these other, like acetaminophen that everybody takes, estrogen, those compounds are non-detect. So we found it in the influent water, but coming out, it's not there. Over to the City of Clearwater project that I mentioned earlier, we have to collect that trusted technical data to show the public. This was just a pilot over in Clearwater. It's only about 15 gallons per minute. Daytona Beach project is 200,000 gallons per day. But taking the public and just walking them through, have storyboards, talking to them, answering their questions, they really appreciate it, and they get it. So they can see it, and they actually see what happens. Altamont Springs Pure Alta project did some pretty intensive testing on their system, on their source water, and sampled the water as it was treated through these multiple barriers. And at this project, they did not use reverse osmosis, because like Robert and I think Suzanne mentioned, was maybe you don't need that for your source water or for your need for your utility. You don't need to go to direct potable or the full advanced treatment. You can use a teeny tiny lit less quality. It still meets drinking water standards. So pathogens are pretty much gone. They shot for like a 4 log removal and got 10 log removal, or shooting for, basically 4 and getting 10 out of it. So the process that they tested is produce water that's safe to drink.
Chuck, I don't want to interrupt your pathogen removal. It's very important, but we are running out of time.
Let's go.
Can we bring this in for a landing? And so
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yes, ma'am.
But there's too much
Sorry.
estrogen in the
They
water.
Pure Alta won 2 awards. Okay, I'll do a quick cost comparison of potable reuse and brackish groundwater RO, Clearwater and Daytona Beach. About, let's say, round it off to $4 per 1,000 gallons. The Punta Gorda reverse osmosis treatment plant, 3 MGD, $4 a 1,000. And I got a little funky scale here. The Orange County, California project that's in that yellow dot way to the right. They got the economies of scale there. I think it's like 272 per 1,000 gallons, but they're running 130 million gallons per day, not 3. So it's affordable. And the last one is we can't think of traditional groundwater costs as the baseline anymore. We're up. This is our next step. Cheers.
Cheers.